Om Jnana-timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne She Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, I'll just admit everyone in the waiting room. There's always the slow trickle at the beginning. I think I admitted everyone in. And then let me share my screen. Let me know once you can see the screen, as always. You can all see my screen?
Yes, Rosie.
Yep, okay. Too easy. Okay, so actually we might just quickly touch on the previous slides. So what do we go through? We went through and we discussed again the Gita Upanishad section, right? Of course, the whole Bhagavad-gītā is the Gita Upanishad, right? It is not that just this section is. However, we can very much say that this section almost most strongly can lay claim to the title Gita Upanishad. It's in some cases straight up paraphrasing, straight up taking texts from the Kathopanishad. It's filled with Upanishadic aspects of knowledge and wisdom. And it is all concerned with jnana, with the soul, right? All of these features of an Upanishad, right? And so that's what we were discussing. We were showing just quickly, here, based on this purport, Prabhupada, he has commented, and all of our acharyas make the same comment. They've said, Arjuna, he has articulated that he knows Artha-śāstrā very well. He knows how to live a successful life. He has articulated dharma-śāstrā very well. He knows how to live a good and religious life. But now Krishna, he is saying there is something even beyond goodness. There is something even beyond religion. And when we come to understand knowledge of matter, soul, and the supreme, this jnana is beyond even goodness, even religion, right? The true essence of what religion is pointing towards. This must be there. And if this knowledge is not there, if this realization is not there, then, well, we're working on a lower platform. And conversely, if this knowledge is there, working towards that knowledge, working on the platform of that knowledge, while the other platforms are valuable, they are always overruled by that platform. So we discussed that. Then we looked at these schools with the rhetoric, right? With Krishna, he was saying, even if, and Srila Prabhupada, following in the footsteps of Baladev Vidyabhushan, he's commenting, right? When he says even if, he's referring not just theoretically, even if there are such people, but he's commenting even if you are, the people that definitely do exist. He's referencing a clear set of philosophical schools. Then we talked about how it's reinforcing this point, the eternality of the soul. The soul is fundamentally different to all that we know besides the soul, right? All of this world, everything around us is asattaha, right? It is unenduring, it is untrue, but the soul is sattaha. It is enduring and it is true. And therefore, the soul and that which is done on the platform of the soul is all that is meaningfully true. And then we discuss these to discuss the metaphor, or maybe not the metaphor, but the somewhat elusive shloka. And then again, we got up to here and then we called it a day there. So I hope most of you did do the readings. Finished chapter 2, I believe was the readings, the Sthita Pragya. As I said, the Sthita Pragya, he's very much a, he or she, they're very much a change of pace to the to the rest of the second chapter. But let us continue on from here. We'll try and do most of the speaking in the first half and then get to our activity after the break. Before we go ahead though, are there any questions from the reading? I'll just see. So no questions? Okay, too easy. So as we were discussing last week, now Krishna, he has concluded a section discussing this high knowledge, and it is very high knowledge, right? This is knowledge on a very, very high platform, and so it's a little hard to implement. We hear it, we can intellectually accept it, but it's very hard to realize it. There is jnana and there is vijnana, right? There is jnana, which is knowledge, and there's vijnana, which is realization. So, does anyone know? Can anyone explain the difference between the two? The difference between jnana and vijnana?
I believe jnana is referring to mainly to the material knowledge.
Yeah.
Whereas vijnana is to understand our true nature.
Yes, for sure. That's definitely there, right? Vijnana pertains primarily to the spiritual and the transcendental. However, we can also say that jnana is knowledge of something, but vijnana is the realization of it. We can think of an iPhone, right? You can have an iPhone in your hand, right? And you can say, you can have the jnana, you can have the knowledge. Oh, this iPhone, you can have the jnana of your iPhone. And a jnana of your iPhone is that this thing is, it's this many centimeters tall, it's got a glass screen, I paid too much money for it, etc., right? This is jnana about the iPhone. Vijnana is knowing to buy an Android instead. No, actually, but vijnana is knowing how to use it, right? How to install, how to utilize it. You have a realization, you have an understanding of it. It's not just that you know the dimensions of it. It's not just that you understand about it. It's that you understand it itself, right? Another example is that I have the jnana that I'm not my body, right? I know I'm not my body, I'm spirit soul, right? But I remember in the Sydney winter of 2019, the hot water ran out in my apartment. And whenever I took a shower, I definitely realized I did not have big jnana, that I'm not my body. Like in that moment, I definitely knew that I was my body, right? So we can have jnana and we can have big jnana. And there's an important distinction here because Arjuna now, he has already received jnana. He's already received knowledge. You are not this body, right? He has already received knowledge. This is the nature of the soul. But in his conditioned state, he has not realized it, right? Otherwise, Krishna could have stopped the Bhagavad-gītā there. Of course, he wouldn't because he'd want to glorify bhakti even more. And that's why the pastime keeps on going. But Krishna, technically, he could have stopped there, but he doesn't. Because Arjuna, he has heard the knowledge, but he does not know how to realize it. He does not know how to practically have it realized in his life. Nandan Prabhu, I think you had a question.
It was less of a question, but in my language, and it's carried on from olden day lexicon to current day. Is a Vijnani is meant to be a scientist.
Oh, really?
And so yeah, they call a scientist a Vijnani. So it's essentially, I guess, it's like the fact that like they realize the knowledge and they're practically applying that. Whereas I guess a jnani is just someone who's using that, but not really realize that knowledge.
Yeah, you could say. Yeah, you could say it's another way of approaching it, because V in Sanskrit, when we see it, it's intensifying. It's very hard to translate the prefixes in Sanskrit. Besides is easy. Just means not, right? But besides all the other ones are like ava, ava, v. All of these you'll have a nightmare trying to translate them directly into English. You just have to get an intuitive feel. But with V, it's often an intensifier, and not necessarily an intensifier in a positive way, in the example of vikarma, right? But it's an intensifier. And so, yeah, as you said, it's doing the next step with that knowledge, right? Yeah, that's a good example. So we have exactly that, right? Jnana and Vijnana. And now Krishna, he knows Arjuna's only got the Jnana, right? He's only got the Jnana, but now he has to have the Vijnana. But before he can get to even implementing the Vijnana, he's realized, well, Arjuna, now I need to speak his language. I've spoken the highest truth. Now let me speak to him, right? So here we find sometimes people, they will, Varun, I think you're unmuted. So we'll find, right, that, what was I saying? It was about Jnana, Vijnana. Oh yeah, so we'll find sometimes, right, people, they'll attend certain programs, right, and they'll think, oh, this is so watered down, right? Well, I don't think you can water it down as much as Krishna's about to water it down. In the you won't be able to find it watered down as much as Krishna's about to, in a sense, water it down. But we also have to realize that Krishna is doing something specific here. As we now begin to discuss the texts, Krishna, he is not just watering it down, but he is also now giving an overview of the entirety of the Bhagavad-gītā. Very much here we find that the second chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā is the contents of the Gita summarized. We're going to find Krishna goes from the lowest level of action, the lowest level of understanding, the lowest level of realization. And at the end, he will be discussing the Sthita Pragya, right? The highest level of action, the highest level of understanding, the highest level of existence. And we'll find that he is delineating the yoga ladder. He is delineating the hierarchy that is going to be built in the Bhagavad-gītā, because the Bhagavad-gītā can seem confusing at times, right? It can seem to be like it's saying very many different diverse, multifarious things, but it's not. It's saying different things at different levels, and it's constructing a very practical means by which one can gradually come up into higher and higher levels of realization. And this is first laid out in its fullness, you could say, in this section here. So Krishna, what does he say? He says, Swadharmam api chavekshya na vikampitum arhasi dharmyadhi yudhach shreyo nyat Ksatriyasya na vidyate. Okay, who would like to read out the English? Maybe Rani Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Yeah, Krishna. Considering your specific deity as Kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. And so there is no need for hesitation.
Jai. So now we find Krishna has completely changed gears, right? We've finished this very esoteric philosophical discussion on the nature of the soul and the nature of the body. And what does he move to? Now he's speaking again about dharma, right? Now he's speaking about dharma. Now he's speaking about duty. Now he's speaking about goodness, duty to society. He's speaking about all of these things, right? And so he's making this point. And he's making 2 points with this. Firstly, he's making the point that, oh, Arjuna, right? Yes, I'm answering you with the higher knowledge. Yes, I'm answering you with knowledge of jnana, of spiritual realization. Yes, I'm answering you with all of these, but even if I go to your level of arguing on terms of religion, right? Even if I go onto that level, still your argument makes no sense, right? He's refuting him. He's saying, even if I accept your terms of agreement, the dharma, religion is the highest consideration, right? And we find in Chaitanya Charitamrita that dharma is very much not the highest consideration. Does anyone know what dharma is called in the Chaitanya Charitamrita? It's in the first chapter. I don't know if any of you are familiar. Dharma is called a cheater, right? It's called cheating. There's the 4 goals of life that are mentioned, right? Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Not in that order, right? Cheating dharma, exactly. They are the number 1 cheating. So there's, of course, we can accept artha, wealth. We can accept that as cheating, right? Kama, lust. We can accept that as cheating. But even dharma, right? Even the execution of goodness, of religion in society is considered cheating. Even we can consider moksha, liberation. That is also cheating dharma, right? Well, then what is actual dharma? What is non-cheating dharma? What is true action? It is Krishna prem, love for Krishna. Bhakti itself is truly the only non-cheating religion. All of these other expressions of dharma, right? Or of the duties of man, right? They are not cheating only if they point towards bhakti. Without bhakti, as Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur has rendered, they're just cheaters. So we know this is the case, but Krishna, he's saying, even if I do accept this term, right? Even if I do accept these terms, right? And I do not speak on this higher platform, which I've established, right? Even if I go back down, I will still show that what you are saying, it makes very, very little sense. Because even though you are saying it is irreligion to fight, actually it is irreligion not to fight. And we find, how can we understand this argument? Srila Prabhupada has said in the purport, out of the 4 orders of social administration, the 2nd order for the matter of good administration is called the Kshatriya. Again, he is saying, Arjuna, fight not out of personal vengeance, but because you're a Kshatriya. You as a Kshatriya, it is your duty to make sure that that law and order is upheld, right? This is not your personal vendetta, right? This is not your personal vengeance. This is you maintaining a duty in society. This is you maintaining that justice is upheld, right? We might say, oh, well, let's let their karma take care of it. But we can think, already we see today's society, there is no punishment for so much of injustice that happens. And how much chaos is it, right? How chaotic is it? Without the, if we have full anarchy, as appealing as anarchy can appear, there will be some issues, right? And so Srila Prabhupada, he's very careful to make this point. It is again not that Krishna is saying, well, you've been spited, you've been insulted, so now go kill him, right? He's not making that point at all. Krishna is making the point that you have to uphold the duty of a Kshatriya. You have to uphold not just your dharma, but the dharma of all of society. And by doing so, then you are being religious. Otherwise, you are being irreligious, if we are thinking in terms of religion. And then, what do we hear? Yadrichaya chopapannam svargadvaram apavritam sukhina kshatriya partha labhante yudham idrisham. Maybe then we can hear from Mrunal Mataji. Would you like to read out the English?
Hi Krishna. O Partha, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of heavenly planets. Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So again, out of context, it would seem like, what's Krishna going on about, right? Krishna, he's saying there's holy war and there's heavenly planets and all of these things. We have to again remember the context, right? Krishna, he is going down and he's just addressing Arjuna's arguments, they're built on the lowest platform, right? They're built on ideas of how will I enjoy, right? How will I enjoy? That's the central point. So Krishna, he's coming down to that level before building up. Again, we find this is the nature of the spiritual master, right? Srila Prabhupada, initially to get people to chant, he will say, who is unmuted? I think Nitai Prabhu, could you please mute yourself? Oh, no problem, it's just the background sound is a bit, or is it Nitai Prabhu? I think, I'm not sure who's unmuted. Anyways, questions here and then, okay, well, yeah. So he's not making the point that do this, he's saying, even addressing that point, right? And so he's going to that level. And this is what the spiritual master does. Srila Prabhupada, he would say, chant and be happy, right? So simple, he would say, like that he would encourage. And what is the discovery of lots of devotees, right? You'll go in a few kirtans, you'll have a lot of fun, right? But at one point you realize you're chanting and you're not happy, right? And then at a higher level, maybe you chant and you're happy, but as Gaur Govinda Maharaj says, you are not chanting the holy name if you're chanting it for yourself, right? You're only chanting the holy name if you chant it for the pleasure of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, right? It's not that he's contradicting Prabhupada. It's that Prabhupada, he is bringing some consideration and he's pulling people into the understanding of the holy name. And then deeper and deeper they go, right? So Krishna, he's doing the same thing, right? In one sense, you can say chant and be happy is always true, except our concern at the beginning when we hear it is we hear chant and be happy and we think, oh, I'll chant and I'll be happy. But at the higher level, we think I'll chant and Krishna will be happy. So like this, we can see there is this gradation, there is this growth, there is this development, right? And this is always there, right? Sometimes Srila Prabhupada, he would say, and it's not untrue, right? I'm not saying that they're lying, right? What Srila Prabhupada said is not untrue, right? But the meaning that's there is meant to be accessible in a certain way. Sometimes Prabhupada, he would say, follow the regulative principles, chant the holy name, and you'll go back home, back to Godhead in this lifetime, right? He will say like that. Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he would say, you need 3 lifetimes minimum to go back home, back to Godhead. 1 lifetime chanting Nama Parad, 1 lifetime chanting Nama Bhas, and 1 lifetime chanting Shuddhanam, right? Now, both are true, right? Because it really depends how rapidly you take up this process of Krishna consciousness, right? If you take it very rapidly, then you can do it in 1 lifetime easily. Realistically, most of us will take more than 1 lifetime, right? Prabhupada, he is not lying, right? He's not saying an untruth. 100%. It is possible for all of us to go back home, back to Godhead in the next second, right? In the next second, we can all have the highest levels of Krishna prema, love for Krishna, right? But how many of us will actually take up all of that mercy that is available to us, right? So again, we will find encouraging words can be spoken, or words can be spoken that while they are true, right? They are not maybe the full balanced assessment, right? They are speaking to the situation and the context of the person who are being spoken to. This is the nature again of the spiritual master, right? We can take, again, my favorite example is the fasting on Janmashtami one. People always say, I wish I would have been there when Srila Prabhupada is manifesting his pastimes, and I'm the same. And I can tell you one of the big reasons is so that I could have had candy while fasting on Janmashtami, right? So because again, right, Srila Prabhupada, what is he doing, right? Of course, the purpose of fasting is to remember Krishna, right? So Prabhupada, he's gradually introducing, right? He's gradually introducing his disciples into the purpose of fasting, right? And then he's giving them candy. This is not a wrong thing to do, right? This is not something that's incorrect because it's fulfilling the purpose of remembering Krishna. But again, it is not the constant standard, right? Again, morning program. Srila Prabhupada, throughout his letters, we don't find this often, right? Often we like to say, one day I will follow the 4 regulative principles. I hear this often, especially among the youth, right? One day I'll follow the 4 regulative principles, right? One day, this is the goal, right? Once you follow the 4 regulative principles, then boom, you've got Krishna Prem. That's the goal of your life complete, right? Right? Sometimes you'll hear this attitude, but Prabhupada, this wasn't even, the 4 regulative principles on their own weren't even the bare minimum for Srila Prabhupada. If you look up the 4 regulative principles in database, you'll also find rising early in the morning and reading my books, right? And he didn't say, and then you are perfected. He said, then you are at the baseline. You are at the bare minimum of being a devotee. My spiritual master, actually, and this might be too early in the morning to hear some heavy Kaitabha, what to do. My spiritual master, I was hearing one class, and he said, if one is not observing Ekadashi, chanting their rounds and observing the 4 regulative principles, we cannot seriously consider them to be a devotee. That's what he said. He said we can encourage them and smile, but we do not seriously consider such personalities to be devotees. Not in a judgmental sense, of course, but in a sense of, yeah, in a sense, at our level, we should be discerning, right? But that's not to discourage any of you if you're not doing that. I'm just trying to make the point of how Srila Prabhupada dramatically changed, because in the early days, they weren't waking up for Mangal Arati, right? They weren't doing anything of the sort, right? There was none of that. And yet Srila Prabhupada, he met his disciples where they were at and he brought them up. So actually I'm making the opposite point. If you feel discouraged hearing such heavy things, you can know that my spiritual master, he was speaking that to a group of more serious devotees, right? And they were at the level to hear such words. Such words maybe wouldn't be words that are there to be heard by somebody who's not at that level, right? So again, we find different gradations. So I'm saying this only to come back to contextualize Krishna's statements here. Krishna, he's not saying these as absolute principles. He's not lying either. These are the truth, but he's saying these in order to build up Arjuna from the point where he's at, right? Okay, let me just check what people have written. Roasted, yeah. So we find all of this. So what is Krishna saying here? Krishna, he is not again saying, therefore fighting, therefore, go out and fight. He's addressing Arjuna's point. Firstly, he's addressing Arjuna's point of irreligion. He's saying, actually, it's irreligious for you not to fight because religion will decay, society will go terribly, and all of these things, right? And then he's addressing Arjuna's point of pleasure, right? He's addressing Arjuna's point of Arjuna saying, how will I enjoy? And Krishna saying, well, I think you'll enjoy a lot in the heavenly planets, right? Because either they will enjoy because they will be in the heavenly planets, or you will enjoy, right? If you fight and you win, then you win, you've got enjoyment. And if you fight and you lose, well, then you'll be lost in the heavenly planets. And that is also not a bad time, right? So Krishna is saying, even if you're thinking on this low level, and again, as I've established, this is not Krishna's, when people say the beauty and nectar of the Bhagavad-gītā, right? The beauty and nectar of the Bhagavad-gītā is that Krishna will speak this and then tie it all into devotional service. It is not that this teaching is here the glory of the Bhagavad-gītā, if you get what I mean. The glory of it, it is glorious. It's infinitely glorious in that it's about to be used to bait Arjuna into bhakti. We should not think, otherwise these texts can almost seem scandalous, right? Maybe not that far, but they can seem a little odd, right? And maybe some of this might be relevant to your essay questions. Okay, I hope you're all thinking about them. Soon, I would say by the end of today, you could probably start the first one. By the end of today, maybe until next week you could wait, but by then I would have started the first question of the two. Okay, and then what happens? Attachetvam imam dharmyam sangramam na karishyasi tataha sva dharmam kirtim cha hitva papam avapsyasi. Okay, and then maybe we can have, well, we had Mrunal Mataji, so let's have Shivam Prabhu read out the English.
If, however, you do not perform this religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter.
Yes, exactly. And this is again just continuing it, right? So this is continuing the point. You will incur sins, right? So this text actually hits all of the points that Krishna is hitting in this initial section, right? In this initial section where he is just speaking about karma, about duty, and all of these things. So what is it? You will incur sins. That means you're acting irreligiously because you've neglected your duties, right? But not only are you acting irreligiously and neglecting your duties, but those sins what is the result of sins? Well, the result of sins is punishment, right? So you won't be able to enjoy when you're being punished. So there we have it, religion and punishment, boom, boom, boom. And then we get introduced in the last part of this text to the final point that Krishna is making. Krishna is appealing to Kshatriya pride, right? The pride of the Kshatriyas. And he's saying, everyone, you will lose your reputation as a fighter. And we know for Kshatriyas, that reputation is so important. When Dhruva Maharaj, when he went out to the forest, right, to perform his tapasya, who meets him, right? Narad Muni, right? And Narad Muni, he appears and he tells Dhruva Maharaj, he says, you're a little boy, go back home. What are you doing, right? And Dhruva Maharaj, he says, no, I am so resolute, right? I will do this. I will perform all these austerities. I will meet the Supreme Personality of Godhead and I will get my kingdom. And Narad Muni, he speaks this wonderful verse where he says, this is the glory of the Kshatriyas. Look at their anger, look at their passion, huh? Even a small Kshatriya child, right? So fired up, right? And so we find here again, Krishna, he knows this about the Kshatriyas. And so he is speaking like that. He is egging Arjuna along. We find in the purport, there's a very nice weapon of how Arjuna, he even beat Lord Shiva in a fight, right? And he received the weapon, the Pashupatta Astra. This is interesting. In Bhagavatam, you'll sometimes find Arjuna praying to Shiva. This is why, right? It is not that Arjuna is a devotee of Shiva. He is, in the sense that Shiva is a great devotee, and so he is a devotee of the devotees. But actually, he's praying to him because Shiva is a guru to him, because he taught him how to use his weapon. If we had more time, we could go into the one pastime where this happens. But if you have spare time, you can read the stealing of the Brahmin boys at the end of 10th canto. At the end of Krishna book, you'll find Arjuna, he starts praying to Shiva. And there's a few reasons why. This is maybe a bit tangential, but now that I've started mentioning, what happens is, as we know, the boys, they've been stolen and everyone's praying to Krishna, protect these boys, right? And the boys are still being stolen. So one aspect is that Arjuna, he prays to Shiva because he thinks, oh, well, Krishna couldn't protect him, so I'll give Shiva a go this time. But as you can see here, this is all for the pastime, right? Such things happen the same way the Bhagavad-gītā happens, right? Such thoughts will enter in order to facilitate the pastime. But another reason why Arjuna prays to Shiva is because Shiva is the one who has taught him this military science. And because of this, he's praying that Shiva will help empower him to to protect these boys. And actually, that pastime, just the final point, that pastime, even though it's at the end of Krishna book, it actually happened before the Kurukshetra war. There's a long reason why. Okay. Oh, the nature of Kshatriyas. Yes, that is it. So then what do we hear? Very famous text. Akirtim chapi bhutani kathayashyanti te vyayam sambhavatasya chakirtir maranad atirichyate. Then maybe let's have Rohan Prabhu. Is your internet fine enough to read out the English?
Yeah.
Enjoy.
People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death.
Yes. So they will always speak of your infamy. Again, now he's doubling down on the point, right? On the Kshatriya pride. Our acharyas actually say some of the insults that they would say about Arjuna, and my favorite is, I think it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. I'm pretty sure, or it's Baladev Vidyabhushan. It's one of those two. They say they will, they elaborate and they say they will all go around and they will say, Arjuna, oh, he is a barren sesame seed. So, I think at the time, I'm sure culturally that would have been a very bad insult. It's not too insulting these days. I'm sure if I was bantering with Vignaraj Prabhu, he wouldn't get too hurt if I called him a barren sesame seed. But again, we can say that they're acting in a very, very different context. At the time, such things would have been very insulting to hear, right? Especially being barren. We know the Kshatriyas, they have that big pride. That's why whenever Krishna, he uses the word impotent, describing Arjuna, it's very much hitting him at his passionate Kshatriya pride, right? What do you mean I'm impotent, right? In the same way, they'll be saying he's a barren sesame seed. And why will they be saying this? Not only will they be saying this because he did not fight, right? Not only will they be saying that he did not fight, but also they will be saying, look, he brought his friend Krishna, right? He brought his friend Krishna to the battle, and Krishna, that wonderful friend, he came to support him. And then what did he do? He just left him on the battlefield. What a guy, right? That's what they'll be saying. Arjuna, for two reasons. One is that Krishna, he put all the effort into coming, and now you're abandoning him, right? And secondly, you're abandoning him on a battlefield of all places. You're not abandoning him at the movies. You're abandoning him in the middle of a war, right? He's put all this effort into coming, and you're such a coward that you would turn away. He dogged his mates, to put it into as Nandan Prabhu said, right? So that's what they'll be saying. They'll be saying Krishna, right? Not Krishna, Arjuna, how could you have left Krishna there, right? So there we find Krishna appealing to the ego, if you will, the ego of the Kshatriyas. And then Bhaya Drannaduparatam Mangsyante Tvam Maharataha Yesham Chatvam Bahumato Bhutva Yasyasi Laghavam. And then maybe we can have Uma Mataji. Would you like to read out the English translation?
Yes, Prabhuji. The great generals who have highly esteemed your name and fame will think that you have left the battlefield out of fear only, and thus they will consider you insignificant. Thank you, Prabhuji.
No problem. Thank you, Mataji. So, and here we find Prabhupada, he's doing, often I'm saying the acharyas say that so-and-so said this and this and this. Here we find a nice example of Prabhupada doing the same, right? This format of saying, Krishna was saying, and then he says something 50 times longer than the shloka itself, right? And here we find it. Lord Krishna continued to give his verdict to Arjuna. Do not think that the great generals like Duryodhana, Karna, and other contemporaries will think that you have left the battlefield out of compassion for your brothers and grandfather. They will think that you have left out of fear for your life, and thus their high estimation of your personality will go to hell, right? So here we find, right? And this is the point Krishna is making. He's saying, what? Do you think everyone's going to be impressed with you, right? You think everyone's just going to think you're a loser, right? Whenever I read this purport, I always think, when you go out into the western suburbs, I find, actually, they're all over Sydney. I don't want to generalize, but I find them more often when I visit like certain, not even all of the western suburbs. Let me retract all of that. Certain parts, right? I hear it more often. You'll see people in like these cars and they've modified them so the engines are louder and everything. I'm sure we've all experienced that, right? And they go vroom, vroom, and they're driving around, and in their mind, they're thinking, wow, I'm sure they're thinking this. They're thinking, I'm so cool, right? And everyone just sees them and they think, what losers, right? Krishna is making the same point. He's thinking, you think that they will see you and see some compassionate, amazing person? No, they're just going to see you and think you're a coward, right? They'll think you're afraid, right? Duryodhana will say, see, look how finally I beat Arjuna, right? Karna, he'll say, I was always better than Arjuna all along, right? All of them, they're not going to say, oh, wow. Right? Do you think Karna is going to turn around and say, oh, wow, Arjuna, with the most compassionate heart, has given me so much mercy? Do you really think this, Arjuna? Do you really think this is what's going to be said about you? No, they're going to tell so many bad things about you. They're going to be going around and say, oh, that barren sesame seed, Arjuna, right? That's what they're going to be doing. So Krishna, he's appealing to that Kshatriya ego, right? You can't deal with them. And now we might be thinking, what happened to this high philosophy? Before we were talking about the soul, it is not slain, and now we're talking about trash talk. Again, right? Krishna, he's addressing Arjuna. He's gone from the highest point, and now he's coming down to very relevant, right? Very, very relevant. Now he's speaking, addressing his initial doubts, right? Addressing his initial doubts. And then now he's just about to soon discuss now, how do you realize those high truths I was talking about? I'm addressing your doubts for now, and then we're going to come to something higher. And then we hear Avachya vadanscha bahun vadishyanti tavahatiha nindantastava sammartyam tatto dukkataram nukim. And then maybe Srinivas Prabhu, would you like to read out the English?
Thank you, Prabhuji. Your enemies will describe you in many unkind words and scorn your ability. What could be more painful for you? Hare Krishna.
Yes. So he's continuing the point, right? How could you tolerate this? How could you tolerate any of this, right? I know you're a Kshatriya and I know you wouldn't be able to. And he said for good reason, right? So Krishna, again, he's not just egging him along saying this he's saying for good reason. As Prabhupada clarifies in the purport, you've given actually really odd reasoning, right? A lot of your reasoning makes sense, but it's all based on the most unnoble of motivations. This won't benefit me. I won't enjoy this. So not only will they say bad things about you, but I'm sorry, Arjuna, they're going to say them for good reason, right? Maybe their personal reasoning won't be good for saying it, but they will be justified in criticizing you because how you are behaving, what you are saying is very criticizable. So this is the point that Krishna is making. And then he comes to the conclusion of this karma kanda section, this sakama karma section, and we will define those terms a little bit more after we finish hearing this text. Hato va prapsyasi svargam jitva va bhokshyase mahim tasmad uttishta kaunteya yuddhaya kritta nishchayaha. And then maybe Katyayani Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Sure, Prabhu. Thank you. O son of Kunti, either you will be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up with determination and fight. Thank you, Prabhu.
So there he said. So even if he's come to his conclusion, and that's why text 38, then we're going to be going into, again, we're going to go into even more elevated philosophy, right? But he's finished his point. He said, therefore, I said all of these things. Even if, this is almost an extension of his even if part, right? The even if you don't believe in the soul, that's almost continued until this text, right? But it's a different even. Even if there is no jnana, even if there is no bhakti, even if there's only dharma and artha, even if there's only these things, even if there is only religion and personal wealth and enjoyment, even if there's only these things, right? Then still you should go ahead and fight, right? So he's making these things to settle Arjuna down before he starts dropping very heavy knowledge onto him. Now, I'm going to answer, I think, Nandan Prabhu's question now, because I just think it's relevant now before we go off into our big discussion. Prior, wouldn't Arjuna then have done dharma? Oh, okay, yeah. So good point. They're still executing their dharma as Kshatriyas, right? They're fighting, right? So Bhishma and Drona, they do have some sort of allegiance to the Kauravas, right? It's not that they're and this is an interesting tension in the Mahabharata, because I think the Mahabharata is this very interesting exploration of dharma. And we actually see this in between the generations. We find different interpretations of dharma. What does dharma mean? How does it realize? Bhishma, he's very famously rigid, right? He is so rigid down to the last letter of the law, right? Whereas the Pandavas, they're a bit more flexible, right? They'll follow dharma, but they say, well, let's follow the spirit of dharma rather than the strict wording of it. Yes, I knew somebody was going to ask the question, Shree Mataji. I still don't know the answer to that. I'll just straight up, I wonder this each time. My understanding, I do have an understanding, but I don't know if it's the understanding. The way that I've interpreted is he's saying this referring to Arjuna's doubts. So Arjuna is doubting if victory was certain, because we're in this sort of entertaining Arjuna's doubts phase of the Gita. That seems to be somewhat playing, that seems to be, how do I put it? I think that explanation can make sense, but it's not exactly clear in the text. So I'm not fully confident in that reading. It's something that I've been wanting to look into, but I still haven't fully looked into, but at least how I read it, just from my, yeah. So that's my gut reflex. Yes, controversy. Yes, Prabhupada. Prabhupada is no stranger to contradicting himself. Actually, I'll quickly finish Nandan Prabhu's question, and then I have a point to make about that quote Mrugank Prabhu shared. A nice quote. I think it's very relevant to our study. So yeah, so they will get elevated because they're still fighting as Kshatriyas, right? They're still doing their duty, the duty of a Kshatriya, right? So even though they're not fighting under the leaders who are being dharmic, they will still get that benefit because they're still executing their duty as soldiers, right? So yeah, so
would that then apply to like people in the army nowadays? Even though they're not fighting, their leaders are doing dharmic stuff because they're in that position and they do it, then they'll get heavenly planets. Is it? Am I taking it too far?
I think you're taking it to, I think you are taking it to a degree that it can be taken. I don't know if I would take it to that degree, but I wouldn't really be able to strongly say no, right? I think you can take it to that degree, but I would think that that's still the way that to be executed would have to be dharmic, right? When we think of how this one is being done, it's still a terrible affair, but it's done away from civilians. It's done on a battlefield. It's done according to strict codes and ethics, which I don't think we see in wars today, right? I
think the purpose for which I asked is it appears that at least when it comes to the operation of karma and dharma, it appears that when you're performing your duty, it doesn't really kind of matter under which like kind of side you're on, as long as you just perform that duty, then you get the result, rather than looking at the intricacies between, like, you know, if you're following a certain leader, as long as you're following according to the Shastric principles under which your duty falls, then you will get the result, as opposed to looking up and then thinking some kind of duty that's linked between the master and the performer. Yeah,
and that's true, because how can we blame the soldiers for the incorrect decisions of their leaders? Do you get what I mean? It's not a case that, yeah, so therefore if you sign up for the most evil party ever, right, and then you're fighting for them, and then you will get it either. It's the case of how can you, the majority of the karmic reaction goes on the leader, because it's the leader who's made the choice, right? A soldier is not trained to actually evaluate this decision properly. You know what I mean? That's why the Brahmins, the scholars, must be there to guide the Kshatriyas, right? Because the Kshatriyas are not very intelligent, right? They're not the ones who are meant to be making those calls, right? So how can you say that those on the other side should suffer from it when they're not really there to make those decisions? Again, Bhishma is bound by his word, right? And you might argue, well, that's not a very nuanced understanding of dharma, and that's a tension that's there in the Mahabharata. We'll find in the Mahabharata that at times others are like, hey, maybe you can be a bit more flexible with following, you know, with being a bit more pragmatic with dharma. And Bhishma is not. That's his personality. He's not a very flexible person when it comes to these sort of questions, right? So he's given his word, he's fighting on that side. But as for the average soldier, again, it is not there. That's the reason why it's important to have these distinct roles. How can one both be militarily, both be a trained and strong soldier and also be an expert in the nuances of politics and dharma-śāstrā, if you get what I mean. So yeah, I don't think they bear the brunt of that, if you get what I mean. The leaders do. This is clear in Shastra, but I think as long as they're following their job, they've done their job, right? And it's the leader who really takes the brunt of that negative impact. However, this is further in this instance, it's even more true because we know there was that promise by Indra that all people who are slain on this battlefield attain the heavenly planets. So it's not just a question of dharma, you can emphasize it even more with this. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to answer that because now we're about to tangent very much away from questions of rewards, because Arjuna, Krishna, he talks about them for like 2 seconds just to address Arjuna where he's at, and then he's back to, you know, talking about higher philosophy. The point that Mrugank Prabhu brings up, controversy, is a really, really nice point, and it's really relevant. And my favorite pastime where this comes up in is in Chaitanya Charitamrita. in the Gundicha Marjan pastime. So what's that? Chapter 10 of Madhya Lila, chapter 11, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but somewhere around there in Madhya Lila. So in that, Srila Prabhupada writes in one purport that it is an offense to pay dandavats, to pay your obeisances to even the spiritual master or any sadhu in front of the deities. This is what Srila Prabhupada writes. Can anyone think of an issue with that? Is there some issue?
Like in the Nectar of Devotion early chapters, it is said that you must chant the mantras of pranam to your guru out loud. It should not be whispered when you're in the temple room. So I feel like that would be a contradiction too.
Well, that's fine because actually it's interesting in the if you go to some other temples, they'll say the pranams out loud, but they won't do dandavats. They won't bow down.
Oh, okay.
If you go in some Gauriya temples, they'll do that. So in ISKCON, we bow down and we go Namo Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prishtaya, Bhutale. But you go to some other lines, and there's nothing like inappropriate about them doing this. After the kirtan, they'll all be standing when they do all the Prem Twani. When they, Haridas Thakur Ki, everyone's standing and they say Jai. But you, Mrugank Prabhu, you did come to the point because we don't do that, right? We do dandavats when we say it, right? When we say the pranam mantra. And not only that, but whose murti do we have in front of the deities, right? We have the deity of Srila Prabhupada. And we all do dandavats to the deity of Srila Prabhupada in front of the deities, right? Those of us in Sydney, we will go in front of Radha Gopinath, and before we give obeisances to Radha Gopinath, we will give obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, right? And then we will give obeisances to Radha Gopinath. Is it Radha Vallabhji in Mayapur? Not Mayapur, what am I saying? In Melbourne?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, so you'll do the same there, right? In Melbourne.
Yes, correct, Prabhuji.
Yeah. So this is a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? Because Prabhupada is written in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is an offense to do obeisances to the sadhu in front of the deities, right? And so one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, they said this. They said, Srila Prabhupada, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter X, text Y, you have written in the purport that it is an offense to pay obeisances in front to the sadhu in front of the deities. And Srila Prabhupada, I can't remember the exact words, but he says something along the lines where he says, controversy or contradiction, something like that, Srila Prabhupada says. And that's his answer. That's where he begins it and leaves it. Sometimes we can have this rigidity. We like to be very rigid in our readings of texts. And this is, again, a very, I'm not saying that the texts themselves aren't rigid, and sometimes the Shastras are read rigidly, but it's a very Western assumption that every text must be read very, very rigidly, right? There's one example I know, I was reading a book written by this Christian guy, and he was visiting the Philippines or somewhere. And in the Philippines, they had this church, and in the church, they said, we do not allow women to become priests. It was there in the guidelines, right? It was some Protestant church, right? And so they were saying, we don't allow women to be priests here. And so he went there and he went and he was there helping that church out, whatever, right? And he was waiting for the big conference to happen where all the priests come together and they all discuss, right? They vote on whatever, kind of like the GBC meetings, except all the priests are there, right? So all the priests are there and he sees some women there, right? And then he says, he goes to the leader of the assembly and he says, did some of the priests bring their wives here, right? And he said, oh, no, we just invited the priests. We didn't want to have to pay for the travel of the families as well. And then he said, oh, did we invite some women to spectate? And he said, what do you mean? And then he said, look, there's some women there. And then he said, oh yeah, they're priests too. And then he said, but wait a second, in your rubrics, you say that you do not allow women to be priests. And then this guy, he said, yeah, we don't have too many, do we? And so I think this reflects that sometimes we'll read things very rigidly when maybe not the whole world reads things very rigidly, if you get what I mean, right? Sometimes Prabhupada will say things very absolutely that actually when we read Prabhupada's other statements, we'll see, oh, wait a second, he's saying the opposite here. Clearly, he is being more nuanced than that, right? But we take this very literalistic assumption. And I don't think that applies necessarily to this purport, Shree, but I think because I'm not sure if Mrugank Prabhu brought it up in context of this purport, but I think it's important to keep in mind in general when reading Shastra. We bring this almost very Western assumption that the literal grammar, right, of each statement is the absolute consideration rather than the mood and message behind the sentence, if that makes sense. When reading, we should keep that in mind, because otherwise, yeah, sometimes we might force the text to do something that it doesn't actually want to do, right? Yeah. Rani Mataji, if victory was certain, then there wouldn't be a war. However, there were signs of victory. Yes, Rani Mataji, we can say that, but we can also say that it was pretty certain that they would win. I think any side with Krishna on it wins by default, if you get what I mean. But also, in sense of the pastime, we can also say that Arjuna, he wasn't certain because he was only seeing signs and he was under Yoga Maya, so he was bewildered. That's at least how I understand it. But again, as I've said, I don't have any pramana to back it up. That's just how I explain it in my head.
Thanks, Prabhu.
Yeah. Okay, what's the time? I think we can have our break now. I'll see you all in 5 minutes and then we will hopefully have an activity. Okay, see you in 5-6 minutes, however long. Have a fun break.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.